Good morning.
Good morning.
We are continuing our study of how we got the Bible. And just before we begin, a quick plug. Turkey trip next May. End of this month, November 25th is when the early bird discount expires. And you can go to my website, Stepping into the Jordan, or you can go to the QR code that I'll also put up at the end if you'd like to learn more. And so last week we began this study of how we got the Bible, and I've recreated my timeline here on the stage, and we'll refer back to that a little bit this week. And just a reminder of the objectives for this study. We're going to be asking several questions throughout this. Number one being, how were our sacred texts developed? Who wrote them and when? How were they passed down? Who preserved them? How were they collected? And why this collection of texts and not some others? And we began looking at some of those other texts last week. And we'll always do a very close and careful reading of the text. And as I said last week, what my objectives are not to do, I'm not interested in deconstructing your faith. So if anything that I say anywhere along the way causes you to have some questions or shake something that you might have believed or thought, please come see me. Please email me. This is not my objective. And it's also not my objective to deny the Spirit's role in Scripture. And I think what you may see as we go through this is that the Spirit's role may be different, but it is quite remarkable, even more remarkable than I think maybe we give it credit for. So, last week we began by looking at what is the Bible and how many are there. And we looked at the Bible as being a library of books, not a book. And it includes a variety of diverse types of literature. And that it was written by many different authors over many different centuries. And we also examined how those authors have often different perspectives. And that Jews and Christians disagree on what constitutes the Bible. But even more interesting is that Christians disagree on what constitutes the Bible, our set of sacred texts. So, this week we're going to look at lesson 2, which is different editors with different objectives. Question mark. And what I want to look at is I want you to do this thought experiment with me, that if the Bible is a collection of books, okay, this collection or this library of books that have been written over time, over the centuries by different authors, then this means that someone or someones, I'm not sure if that's the plural of someone or not, someone had to collect these books. And they arranged them in a particular order. And the question is, what was their logic? And how does that order impact how we interpret Scripture? Or does it? So, if I were to set you about the task of organizing this collection of sacred texts, okay? I give you a collection of books and I say, I want you to organize this library. How would you go about doing it? What are some of the ways or the options that you might use?
Indexing.
Okay, indexing, but on what basis?
Oh, well, you find the index knowledge.
Oh, okay, I heard something here. What was that? Chronology, did I hear? Over here, time, okay. When they were written?
By the author.
Oh, okay, by author. That's interesting. That's actually one I hadn't thought about. So you could do them by author, okay. Now chronologically, this brings up a good question. If you say chronologically, do you mean chronologically by when it was written, or by when it was supposed to have happened? Or when it was discovered? What other ways might you organize a collection like this?
Geographical. Geographical.
Oh, geographically, that's interesting. Okay. Okay.
By event.
By event?
Multiple events are mentioned many times.
Oh, okay, so lining up the different accounts of the different events. Okay, okay.
You could do it like a grant and link to the book, the longest to shortest.
Oh, okay, yeah, maybe you do by longest books first to shortest books last, or the other way around, shortest books first to longest books last.
Or if all the bound books are in different colors.
Oh, by color? Okay, yeah. So do you see there's a lot of different ways that you could go about thinking about how to organize a collection. Now my question is, does the organization matter? Does it make a difference?
Sure.
Why might it make a difference?
Because just take, for example, let's use Harry Potter. If you're reading Harry Potter, and incidentally, I never have, but if you're reading Harry Potter, you're going to want to know what happened in the first book so you can understand what happened in the following book.
Oh, okay, so there's a chronological order to it.
Right.
Okay? Let me play devil's advocate with you for a minute
Okay.
and give you another example. Let's take Star Wars. Star Wars is a good one. Okay? The first Star Wars movie released was what? Number 4, book 4 of the 9 books, the 9 films. Okay? They did 4, then they did what? 5, 6. Oh, 1?
Yeah, but it wasn't like that at the beginning. See, that's the other thing.
What do you mean it wasn't like
They
that?
had to start the other
It
books
wasn't
then.
the author or the filmmaker's idea until it started making money.
So let's take another example. X-Men. Okay? I see what you're saying, but I'm going to say this very nice. I think you're wrong.
Well, being that I saw the original,
And I'll give you another example. If we take the Marvel universe, okay, take X-Men. Okay, so we have the X-Men movies, and we got some X-Men movies, and then all of a sudden we start to get movies like what? Oh, Wolverine. We get origin stories. Here's a funny thing about literature. Origin stories always come second. Harry Potter's an exception. Okay? But you see it in Star Wars, right? 4, 5, 6, now we'll do 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll do these things at the end. Origin stories always come second. So,
You have to get to the exciting part first.
well, here's the thing. Nobody cares about the origin until you know who the characters are. If the characters don't mean anything to you, the origin is worthless. Okay? So now here's a question. We won't talk about it today, but I want you to be thinking about it. When you look at the order that the New Testament books are written, what does it say about the Gospels? And in particular, what does it say about Mark and Matthew and Luke? We'll talk about that next class. So, I just came up with a few of my own ways that you can organize books. You can do it alphabetically. Well, now the question is alphabetically by what? By author? By title of the book? Or you can do it chronologically. We identified that. You can do it by thematic or topic. You can even do it by literature type. I'm going to put all the narrative over here. I'm going to put all the poetry over here. I'm going to put all of the prophecy over here. You can organize it like that. So if we look at the Old Testament, that's what we're going to focus on today. How do we organize the Old Testament books in our Bible? Any of you, I asked this at the end last week. Did any of you, as you were a kid, have to learn the organization of the Old Testament? You know, I remember I can't remember how old I was when I had to memorize the books of the Old Testament. It was after I memorized the books of the New Testament. You know, we always talk about these books as part of their group together. How do we group them together? Okay, we have the law. What else do we have? prophets. We have history, okay. What else do we have? Poetry, okay. So I found this fun picture, and if I'd have had time, you can actually go to Amazon. You can buy posters, right, for Sunday school with this sort of stuff on it. So we're going to focus on the top two shelves today. But you'll notice if you can read the little letters on the shelves, right? They even labeled the shelves nicely for us. We have the law in the first 5 books. We have history, okay, which is Joshua, Judges, Ruth, all the way through Esther. Then we have the poetry, okay. But then we have major prophets and we have minor prophets. Now, let me ask you a question. We label these first 5 books as the law. Are they all law? Okay, there's a whole lot of history in it. Or some would say, as we talked about last week, some would call it ancestor stories. Okay? It's setting up what happens in Exodus. Okay? And we begin to get some law in Exodus. And we get some in Leviticus. And we get some in Numbers. And we get some in Deuteronomy. But here's the thing about those books. Is it just a list of regulations one after another? Leviticus mostly is. But what about Exodus?
It's a travel.
There's lots of narrative thrown in there too.
It's a travel log.
It's kind of a travel log, right? And in fact, if you read Genesis, the end of Genesis to the beginning of Exodus, if there weren't a break there, they would kind of flow right from one to the next. Numbers, a little bit different. Leviticus, a little bit different. Deuteronomy's have its own little thing. Okay, it's mostly a speech. Okay, attributed to Moses that covers most of the book, that rehashes everything that's in the earlier books. Let's see, what else do we have here that's interesting? Why do we organize the major prophets in the order that they're in?
Are they not chronological
Not 100%. Close, but not 100%. The odd man out in that list is Lamentations. Okay? Yeah, Lamentations. It's hard to even in many respects call Lamentations a major prophet.
It had to go somewhere.
Okay, it's got to go someplace, right? And so here's what I want you to be thinking about, right? When you look at this list, what does it tell you? What does it tell you if we label Joshua through Esther, if we label those books as history? What does that imply? What do you think of when you think of history?
Facts. Facts.
Facts, okay.
Story. Interesting but not.
Story.
Interesting but not necessary.
Oh, interesting but not necessary. That's interesting. Okay.
I look at it as a basis for civilization. It's the basis for what our civilization should be after that point.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe it's like you have the way laws are written, the courts make decisions, they give opinions. Maybe this is like the opinions of laws.
Oh, okay. I want you to hold on to that thought for a minute. That's a very interesting thought. So, we read, and I would argue this is mostly what we read. We'll read Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. And when you get to 1 Chronicles, what happens?
It starts repeating. It's repeating.
It's repeated. It starts over. It's like, wait a minute. I just saw the Broadway version of this. Why am I now looking at the Allen, Texas version of the history of Israel, right? Okay, and what do we honestly do when we get to it? Skip it. Okay, we ignore it. And when we ignore that, we often tend to ignore what follows it. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. We might tell our kids the stories of Esther, but we don't talk much about Esther.
But it's foundational. It creates the timeline.
Okay, it creates the timeline upon which all the rest of it hangs. Right. Okay, that's good. And we list these, I love this, major prophets and minor prophets. What makes a major prophet, a major prophet, and a minor prophet, a minor prophet?
How many writings there were?
How popular.
So you say how many writings?
Yeah, how much was written about them? There's just not much, like how much they wrote.
Okay, so the size of the book.
Yes.
Okay.
Popular.
Okay, I hear popularity. Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, we often, when you say major or minor, how does that, in your mind, how does that work?
Important, less important.
Oh, important, significant, less significant. Okay? But in truth, what it is these are the big books and these are the little books.
But there are more little books than there are big books.
Oh, that's interesting.
So maybe they're more important than we think.
Okay. Any idea why they're lumped together in the order that they are and called minor prophets?
They fit on one scroll.
They fit on one scroll. They fit on one scroll. Yeah, the minor ones. The minor ones fit on one scroll. Isaiah's got its own scroll. Jeremiah's got its own scroll. Lamentations doesn't fill a scroll. Ezekiel does. Daniel does. And all the 12 fit together on a single scroll. Okay?
Easy to carry.
What was that?
Easy to carry.
Easy to carry, yeah. So, relatively speaking, right? So, based on this order, what are the last words in our Old Testament? Malachi chapter 4, and these are the last words. Lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, so that I will not come and strike the land with a curse. That's the last words in our Old Testament. So my question to you is, how does this influence your interpretation of the Old Testament?
Well, obviously that was written, that was the last chronological.
So it's not, you're right, it's not the last chronologically. And to me it implies something because, and I didn't bring the Bible where this is actually the case. So if I'm reading Malachi and I turn the page, what's the next thing?
You're going to expect Elijah to come back.
What's that? Okay, I'm talking about our Protestant Bibles. Our Protestant Bibles. What's the next thing you turn to? Matthew. When you read this verse last, here's what it communicates to me. To be continued.
And
The end of season 1. Okay?
are they expect to have Elijah come back?
Yes. And coincidentally, you get to the Gospels.
And he does come back.
And what's the big question they're asking John the Baptist? Are you Elijah? Okay. Jesus says, who does men say that I am? Some say, what? Elijah. And the way we've organized our Bibles, you read Malachi, and you think, this isn't the end. He's going to send Elijah. And I flip the page to the New Testament, and yea, verily, lo and behold, season 2. Now, here's my question. Is our arrangement the only one? No. So, how is the Hebrew Bible organized? Here's the Hebrew Bible. Now, if you'll recall from last class, we talked about the Hebrew Bible, and it's I may look like I'm holding this up backwards, and I'm not imitating our former president standing in front of the church. It's literally backwards from how we normally read. And it says on it, and it's read right to left, Torah, Nevi'im, V'Ketuvim. Okay, Torah, Nevi'im, V'Ketuvim. And that is Torah, the law. Nevi'im means the prophets. It's middle category. And Ketuvim means the writings. Okay? This is how the Hebrew Bible is organized. Now, what do you see that's different?
5 rows, great.
Say again?
So I love the 5 rows. I love that.
Yeah, we'll talk about the 5 roles in a minute. That's not the word I would have chosen, by the way. I pulled this image, and it's from who knows who it's
I love the
from.
organization of it.
Yeah, I chose it for its organization because it laid things out in a nice way. But what do you notice that's different?
Earlier prophets.
Okay, there's no minor or major prophets. Okay, what else?
Kings is a prophet, not a history.
Ooh. Kings is a prophet?
Some of the poetry books are not listed in poetry.
Joe.
Okay, yeah, so a lot of Job is actually written in verse, kind of like poetry. Job is by far in Hebrew the hardest book to read in Hebrew. And there are places where we don't even know what it means. We had no clue. There's a translation done by, his name is Robert Alter, a Hebrew Bible scholar, well-renowned. He's probably getting close to 90 now, maybe in his 90s. And he wrote a translation of the Hebrew Bible in English where he tries to, as best as he can in English, imitate the poetic nature of Hebrew and the wordplay in Hebrew that gets lost in our English translations. And there are places in Job where he just goes to gobbledygook. Because he's like, we don't know what this means. Right? And we see that a little bit in other places. For example, in Isaiah, Isaiah's famous for saying, though hearing they will not, so seeing they will not see, though hearing they will not understand. As one of my professors, Destin, you noticed, he says that there are places in the first chapters of Isaiah where you start reading a section of the poetry and everything is just making sense, and all of a sudden it just quits making sense. And his view is that it's a grammatical way, a verbal way of fulfilling that prophecy that says, though hearing they'll see, they will not see, though hearing they will not understand. That the book itself sort of does that. Okay? Totally lost in our English translation. We don't see it do. But it's in the Hebrew, it shows up. Anything else you see that's different? Ezra, Nehemiah, yeah. So Ezra and Nehemiah technically are on one scroll. And they're considered one book. One book.
The whole history category just seemed
Ah,
odd.
yeah. And I would argue when I first, so the big categories that people really focus on are the big 3. Torah, the prophets, and the writings. These and also former and latter prophets, that's pretty well understood. I'll talk about the 5 roles. Those fit on a single scroll, typically. And the poetry is a very loose term there, as well as history. I would consider that history to be a loose term. But there's also something else that seems to be inherent in the way these books are organized that may not be obvious on the surface. There's 2 things, actually.
So the Daniel, Ezra, Chronicles were the last great.
They're kind of organized based on when the Jews think they were written. The law came before the prophets comes before the writings. So I want to look at a few things. First of all, we have the 12. And that's what they talk about in the Hebrew Bible. The scroll is called the Scroll of the 12. And it contains what we call in our Bibles, typically the minor prophets, what we teach our kids, the minor prophets, because they fit on a single scroll. Over here we have what in Hebrew is called Chamesh Megillot, which is the 5 volumes. Megillah is a word for, it can mean scroll. The normal word used for scroll in Hebrew is sefer, which sometimes gets translated as book, but book is anachronistic. Megillah are volumes is how I make the distinction. And so you have Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Esther, and Ecclesiastes. So, where do we put Ruth in our Bibles?
History.
After Judges, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Why do we put it there? Well, the book starts off by saying, basically in the days of the judges. Right? It sets itself in the days of the judges. But by placing it here, what are the Hebrew writers saying about it? It's serving a different function in history. Perhaps its purpose is not historical, in their view.
I have a question.
Yes.
I wondered this from the last one, where the books were on the shelves. If those writings are poetry, why are they even there? Why are they even included?
Would you say the 5 roles seem to be more emotional too, like?
Oh, okay. Hang on to that thought for just a second. That's a very good observation. So you're asking about the why?
Why the poetry is even there?
Why not? I mean, let's face it, the Psalms are kind of the songbook of Judaism. It's the hymnal, right? So the fact that it's included in sacred scripture, I think, says something about its importance. Okay? That they decided that these should be part of this collection.
Is it the importance of women? Were they?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, if you look at the 5 roles, there's a much greater emphasis on women figures in that book. I had not seen that before. That's actually very interesting. Ruth, and so maybe I guess the emotional side of it too, right? Lamentations is a gut-wrenching book. Horrible gut-wrenching book. Yeah, it basically looks at the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and says, God, we know you warned us, but you went too far. Is it really right that they should be eating the babies because of what happened here? Is it really right that your people should be devastated to this level? It's your fault. And then it says, nevertheless, the covenant loyalty of the Lord never ceases. May his mercies never come to an end. Gut-wrenching book. Esther, we place it in history.
It's a redemption. That one and Ruth is a redemption story.
Yeah. So I will say this about Esther. There is, and again, I'm not denying the canonicity and the inspiration at all. But if you look at how Jews celebrate and read the book of Esther, it's a comedy. It's a comedy. It's a dark comedy. It's making fun of empire. It's making fun of the Persians, because normally when you read the annals of the kings, it will say, in the first year of King so-and-so, and then it will list the greatest thing that they accomplished within their reign. That thing didn't always happen in the first year, but it's their literary way of saying, in the first year, he did this amazing, wonderful thing. Like, in other words, the most important thing he did is this. Well, the book of Esther starts, In the second year of King Ahasuerus, he held a 7-day drinking festival. The greatest thing he did was hold a big drinking party. Okay, and what sets up the whole problem? You know, the king asks his wife to come and dance for everybody at the party, and she tells him, yeah, that dog don't hunt, I'm not doing that. And all the men get together and tell the king, you know, if all of our wives, when the king told the king no, then all societal order is going to go to hell in a handbasket, right? We're not going to be able to get anything done. Okay? You need to do something about this. You know, and then the king makes rules that he can't change once he's put them into law. When you begin to look at it, it's ridiculous. It's making fun of the empire. So it's a way that people come to grips with the fact that we're being oppressed by an empire. And how do we do it? We make fun of it. We parody it. And if you look at how Jews celebrate it with the holiday of Purim, it's like Halloween. They dress up, they go to the synagogues, they're 3 sheets to the wind. Every time the name Haman comes up, somebody, you know, everybody boos, or they blow horns, or they have, you know, it's a total party. Total party. Okay?
And when Esther wrote,
Yes, and they cheer for Esther, right? You know, I mean, it's all these things that when you see it in that light, you're like, oh my goodness, you almost can't unsee it, right? But it's not how we read it. It's different because of where we've placed it in our text.
So the Jews view it as it's embellished events that historically either shape the evidence.
It's a story based on a time period that has a message. Terrible.
So, I mean, like when we study as our teach our kids, this happened. There's no question. This happened.
Yeah.
Right. And the question is, did it really happen, or are we just saying it happened?
I think that when you look at the details of the story, and you also look at the names of the kings and whatnot, it's hard to place it in a historical place.
Right.
It's hard to identify and say, oh, it happened right here.
But, I mean, if it even happened at all.
If it even happened.
Right.
For a Jew, I think, and even for the people of this period, I don't think they would be asking the question, did this happen? They're asking the question, what do I learn from this story?
Well, I was just wondering because if you look at where it's placed, right?
Yes.
That if you look at where it's placed, Song of Songs, it's under writing poetry. None of that is concerned or considered to be truly historical. Job, we say, oh, that's horrible. How did that happen? That didn't happen, right? It's a story told for our benefit.
Yes.
And the only thing that happened is they're grouped under history. The rest of it is just, let me tell you something that is a teaching. So that was my question. You know,
Yeah.
we say Jonah never really happened. It's a teaching, but it's under the prophets because a group of people said, no, that really happened. Another group say, no, that's just an allegory.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, is Esther an allegory?
So I think it is. I think that's one way to look at it. I think it's a story that communicates a meaning that's important for the people of Judea at that time, that's critiquing the empire under which they're living, the Persians.
Okay. And that's why it's over there.
And that's why it's over there. That's why the Jews placed it on that section. Okay? So now, let me ask you this. I wonder if that organization gives some new meaning to some of Jesus' teachings, or some enlightenment to them. We see in Matthew 7, in everything, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets. Or, he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. What books is Jesus talking about? The law and the prophets. Genesis, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, or Genesis through Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12. if we read that with our English mindset, with our English Bible, our Protestant Bible mindset, when he says the law and the prophets, what do we think? A much narrower set of books. The law, and then Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Lamentations, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. So it shifts a little bit the focus of what he says. Now, yes, sir.
When did that organization happen in the Hebrew
It seems to
Bible?
have happened pretty early. Now, the collection that we have it in is the Masoretic text, which is 1000, which is based on Codex Leningrad, which dates earlier. Okay? Now, the question is, what does the Septuagint have? Okay? First of all, we have two different versions of the Septuagint, Codex Vaticanus and Codex Alexandrinus, and they're different. They're different from each other. Okay? And on top of that, they take those, we talked about those books that are the Apocrypha. Okay? They're interspersed throughout. They're not in a nice, tidy little section in the middle. They show up in between. Okay? So what happened is, if you recall from last class, in the early 1500s, Martin Luther came along and he said, you know what? He said, I don't think that our Old Testament scripture should be based on the Septuagint. It should be based on the Masoretic text. And he took all of these books that were not in the Masoretic text, that are scattered throughout here, and he collected them into a single section, and he shoved them in between the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is what the Bible that I use, where it has them placed. So I would argue that, yes, while one of the earliest versions of the Hebrew text that we have is somewhere, this version is 1000, but it comes from a version that's slightly earlier. The version that we have that organizes it the way we have it is from 1500. Okay? It's not from this. It's Martin Luther. So, what are the last words in the Hebrew Bible? Well, it ends with 2 Chronicles 36, 22 to 33. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, did you hear that? In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia? What's the greatest thing Cyrus did? In fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia so that he sent a herald throughout all his kingdom and also declared in a written edict, thus says King Cyrus of Persia, Yahweh, or the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you, all of his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. Yes, ma'am.
But that's not part of the process.
It's not.
So, because when he came back to, Matthew said the law and the prophets.
Yes.
So, the prophets would be the very last, again, would be Malachi.
Not in the way that the Hebrew Bible is organized. Okay? It's organized with this being the last book. So my question is, when the editors collected all this stuff together, okay, and they put it together, what does it mean to put this passage, this story, last versus Malachi?
Maybe for thousands of years, the Jews are trying to get back to Jerusalem.
That last word is the Hebrew word Allah. Allah. It's a guttural A-L-H. Allah. it means to go up. And to this day, when Jews return to the homeland, to Israel, they say they are making aliyah. They are making the going up. The last verse of the Hebrew Bible says, get back to Jerusalem. Get back to Israel.
That's when they make their pilgrimages. Many people do it as a pilgrimage.
It's a pilgrimage, okay? And so, how does that interpret your vision of this whole collection of books? It's not to be continued, right, in the sense of, oh, the story's not over, and, I've got to flip over to season 2. It's, we're back. Yes, it was ugly. Okay, the prophets end with, especially 2 Kings ends, man, we're in Babylon, we're stuck here, we've got no hope of coming back, life really sucks and it's our fault. Game over. But that's not how the story ends in the text. In the Masoretic text, in the Hebrew text, it says, Cyrus says we can go home. Go up. So, yes, sir.
What was the time frame of the Persians and Cyrus?
So Second Chronicles, interestingly, is not the last chronological book written. Okay, the last book written is either Job or Daniel, depending on who you talk to. I don't have an opinion. Either one I can make an argument for.
What I was asking about was the time frame of Cyrus when he was in power in Persia.
Early, like 5. They start going back in about 533. 533 BC. Yeah, 533 BC. And they continue to go back for about 75 years from Persia. And by the way, not everybody goes back. A whole bunch of them stay in Babylon, stay in Persia, and until just the last century, there were tremendous Jewish presence in those areas. Okay? Jews and Christians organize their Hebrew Bibles differently. The organization of the Bible influences how we interpret the whole collection. And the organization influences how we read the individual books within that collection, which we will talk more about in this series. So for next week, because of Thanksgiving, there's no gathering circles next Sunday. We will meet the Sunday after Thanksgiving, where we're going to look at the New Testament and how it's organized. And then how does this understanding influence our interpretation and our understanding of the whole text? And so I would ask you this. Think about what is the first book of, I'll tell you. The first book that we know of, pretty much scholars agree 100% on, is the first New Testament book written is the book of 1 Thessalonians. Okay? So I would ask you to read 1 Thessalonians and imagine that you know nothing else about what's going on before or after in the Bible. If all you have is 1 Thessalonians, read that and tell me what jumps out at you. What's not there? What is there? What's the concentration? What's the focus? Okay. Thank you all very much, and we will pick this up in 2 weeks.